shadow trails Goodwin with deadly intent. Welcome to Wolfe's Casebook. I am your host, Enigma. Share in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means so much. Let's follow the trail. If there's a shadow that follows you, the polite thing for it to do is keep quiet and pay rent. Mine didn't. It walked right into the front room of Nero Wolfe's brownstone on a Tuesday that started smooth as Fritz's Béarnaise, and it did both things a shadow shouldn't. It talked, and it made Wolfe miss his orchids. Not that you can make Nero Wolfe do anything he doesn't want to, except maybe inhale twice at the same insult. I was at my desk in the office on the ground floor, doing what I would rather do than almost anything short of eating or sleeping, which is to say, nothing in particular. The morning mail had come, and I was sorting it with a pencil in my teeth and a healthy contempt for circulars. Below the letters with return addresses that looked like they might contain checks, there was a square envelope the color of old bone, and it was hand-delivered. No stamp, no postmark, no excuse. Wolfe was behind me in his red leather throne, the big one with wings that ought to have had a license plate. He was supposed to be upstairs until noon making love to his orchids in the plant rooms, but he had come down early because the cook had promised a new sausage for lunch, and curiosity, in Wolfe, is not a passion but a nutritional requirement. His bulk was arranged as always, a mountain that had decided to sit and think in a chair. I could hear his breathing, regular, composed, faintly annoyed that air had the gall to occupy his lungs without first asking permission. He said, without looking, "You are lingering over trivialities, Archie." "I'm savoring them," I told him. "It's the only pleasure you let me have between breakfast and lunch. Besides, this one's different." That got his eyes up. Not much, just the amount a cat gives a bird it plans to ignore until it's bored. I held up the bone-colored envelope. Hand-delivered, no return address. Heavy enough to be either money or trouble. I'm hoping money. "What do you think?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that if it were money you would already have opened it." I did open it then, because when Wolfe says a thing like that, he is not suggesting, he's poking. The flap had been sealed with red wax, plain and thick, smashed by something with a flat face. Not a ring, unless the ring belonged to a pope who'd given up letters. Inside was a folded sheet of cream stationery and a smaller envelope with my name on it typed like a funeral invitation. "Ah," I said, "a secret within a secret. We're already in the second act." Wolfe made a sound that meant go on, without granting the words the dignity of speaking. I unfolded the larger sheet first. The letter was typed, no signature, but the style had a kind of educated fussiness to it, like a man who corrects the waiter's French. It read, "Mr. Goodwin, should you value your own discretion, and if Mr. Wolfe is not entirely indifferent to the order of his household, you will bring this letter to him, unattended, at 11 o'clock this morning. I will be in the front room. There is no danger unless you create it." I whistled softly. Not because it was clever, but because it assumed I take instructions from anonymous stationery. 11 o'clock, I said, glancing at my watch. That gives us 12 minutes to decide whether to be offended or intrigued. Wolfe held out a hand. I gave him the letter. He read it with the patience of a man tasting a wine he expects to dislike, then looked up at me without moving his head. "Unattended?" he asked. "Meaning me without you," I said. "Or you without me. I don't like either interpretation." "Nor do I. Yet there is a person in the front room, perhaps already admitted by the doorbell and by your failure to hear it because you are living with your head in envelopes." Wolfe's tone was mild, which for him is the equivalent of a priest rolling up his sleeves. Let us not allow him to stagnate. I stood. "Front room it is. Want to arm yourself with a dictionary, or just your glare?" "Neither. Bring the smaller envelope." I had forgotten it in my palm. I tore it open, walking through the hall, because if a man sends a note with my name on it, I read it before he gets to define the terms. There was a single line inside, typed the same way. If you bring the police, I will leave. If you bring Wolfe, I will stay. Charming, I muttered. Blackmail with manners. The front room of Wolfe's brownstone is designed so divinely that you could set a corpse in it and it would look like part of the decor. Today it held something less cooperative. He was standing by the window, back to the street, like a man who expects to be shot from behind and wants a good view of the last car he sees. The light caught him as I came in, and I sized him up automatically, because that's what I do in a room that begins to smell like trouble. Mid-40s, maybe. Tight-lipped, hair dark but thinning at the temples. He wore a grey suit, expensive enough to show he didn't need Wolfe for money but might need him for oxygen. His shoes were polished too well for a man who walks much, and his coat was draped over his arm though the room wasn't warm. Watch with a slim black strap. Hands steady. None of the cheap nerves you get from frightened clients. These were the expensive kind. Controlled, deliberate. He turned precisely when I was 3 feet inside. That wasn't an instinct. That was timing. He wanted me to see he was alert. "Mr. Goodwin," he said. His voice was measured and polite in the way you tell a surgeon you won't need anesthesia. "Thank you." I gave him my best civilian smile, the one that says I'm happy to see you and also may throw you out a window. "You're welcome. You knew my name." "So you're ahead already. You also knew your way in, so you're either smart or I'm slipping." "You're not slipping. Your cook admitted me." "Fritz gets sentimental about doorbells," I said. "He thinks they're people with hunger." The man nodded once, as if we were equals trading small facts. "Is Mr. Wolfe coming?" "He's on his way. I assume you didn't want me alone because you're shy." His mouth twitched but didn't rise. "I wanted you alone because I wanted control of the first moment. Control is important." "Yeah," I said. "It is to me too. We're going to bump into each other." Wolfe came in then. The room adjusted itself to his presence like furniture, rearranging its conscience. He moved with that slow, deliberate glide that makes you think of a glacier until you remember glaciers don't have opinions. He didn't look at the man immediately. He looked at the chair, because he always does. You'd think the chair was his client. Once he was settled, he raised his eyes. "Sir," he said, "you have delivered an impertinent message. Yet you are here and therefore perhaps have something to offer. Sit down and explain yourself." There are men who would bristle at that. This one didn't. He sat in the yellow chair opposite Wolfe without asking permission. If anything, he looked relieved to be facing Wolfe's bulk and not a door. "My name," he said, "is Conrad Vere." Wolfe lifted his eyebrows 1/8 of an inch, which is a confession for him. "Vere. The Vere Institute?" "Yes." That put a pebble in my shoe. The Vere Institute was a neat Manhattan outfit with high ceilings and low gossip, known for pushing around chess grandmasters and armchair philosophers with equal confidence. They funded cognitive research, hosted fancy public lectures, and had enough donors to keep a small country in lobster. Their annual Vere Symposium on Strategy and Decision got more ink than a Broadway opening. If you read the Times on Sundays with your coffee, you'd seen Conrad Ware's name above photos of smiling Nobel Prize winners. Wolfe didn't say any of that. He knew it. He also knew I knew it and didn't need to tip the hand. "What do you want?" he asked. "And why did you say there would be no danger unless we created it?" "I said it," Vere replied, "because danger already exists. It is simply not overt. Not yet." "You are being theatrical," Wolfe said. "I don't reward theater." Vere leaned forward slightly. "Then let me be plain. Someone has been following Mr. Goodwin." I blinked. That was the shadow finally stepping into the light. I stared at Vere long enough to make him uncomfortable, which didn't take long because he was a man who only got stared at by people who wanted donations. "Following me," I said, "in the sense a fan follows Sinatra, or in the sense you hire a man with a camera and a conscience. Problem?" In the second sense, I hired him. He is one of ours. Quiet, competent. He has been following you for 8 days. Not because I enjoy espionage, but because I was told I must be sure you are not compromised. Compromised, I repeated. By what? The Brotherhood of Bad Typists? Ware's jaw clenched. By someone who wishes to use you to reach Wolfe. Wolfe's eyes moved to mine, not asking but measuring. I held my face blank because I had no idea yet which way this was turning. Wolfe said gently, "Mr. Ware, your statements are discourteous and vague. I will not tolerate both. You will specify your predicament, or you will leave my house." Ware took a breath. He had control. But control is like a belt. Tighten it too far, and a man can't breathe. "Very well. 3 weeks ago," he said, "my institute received an anonymous proposal. It was intriguing. It claimed to demonstrate a method for predicting strategic decisions in adversarial settings with a high degree of accuracy. We are a strategy institute, Mr. Wolfe. Such a claim is not trivial to us." "Indeed not," Wolfe said. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the proposal was accompanied by an ultimatum. We were told to test it under conditions designed by the proposer, a series of competitive scenarios. If we refused, certain internal material would be publicized." "Blackmail," I said. Ware nodded once. "It is not a word I like, but yes. The material threatened is not criminal. It is reputational. Private correspondence, negotiated donor agreements, internal tensions. The kind of thing that can ruin an institution even if it contains no crime. People love scandal more than they love truth." "And you decided to play," I said. "We decided to investigate quietly while appearing to comply. The proposer insisted on a mediator, someone with a reputation for discretion, logic, and leverage. They named Nero Wolfe. That was a nifty little hook. It wasn't a murder, but it was bait, and Wolfe doesn't bite unless he's hungry for the right thing." Wolfe's face stayed still. "If they named me, why did you not come to me immediately?" "Because I was advised not to trust the first approach, not to trust anyone, and because your assistant has close ties with the police." I laughed. "Close ties? I send Kramer Christmas cards. That's not a tie. It's a truce." Ware ignored me. "I needed to know whether you were reachable, whether you would be used to get at Wolfe. I hired someone to follow you and report. He has reported nothing suspicious. That is why I am here." I shifted my weight. I wasn't used to being followed without noticing. That either meant the tale was good or I was getting old. I didn't like either conclusion. Wolfe said, "So you have a blackmailer who claims a predictive strategic method. He wants you to test it, and to compel you has threatened reputational exposure. And he wants me to mediate. Why? Because the scenarios he designed are not purely academic. They involve real people. Real stakes." "Explain." Ware glanced at me, then at Wolfe. I almost admired that he knew where the danger was and wasn't. The proposer set 3 games for testing. Each game pits 2 participants against one another with concealed information. Each participant is someone connected to the institute: board members, donors, senior staff. The games are structured to force choices that reveal private motives. If the method predicts the choices, we are to pay a sum and grant a seat on our board, anonymously. If it fails, the proposer claims they will withdraw and destroy their data. If we refuse to play, they publish the material. Wolfe's eyes narrowed by a hair. "This is not science. It is extortion by vanity." "Yes," Ware said evenly, "but there is more. I believe the proposer is already inside my circle. The games are designed to fracture trust among people who have known one another for years. I believe the blackmailer's intent is not merely to win a seat, but to control the institute, perhaps to redirect its funding or research. I suspect the predictive method is a lure. The outcome is the point." Wolfe stayed quiet, which is how he sharpens a moment. When he spoke, he did it softly. You have not yet mentioned your urgency or your need for me. The first game is scheduled for Thursday. The proposer insists on your presence, either in person or by representation. They say they will not proceed without an arbiter of your caliber. I cannot afford to refuse. I cannot afford to comply blindly. Therefore, I need you. Wolfe considered him. And you think I will do this gratis because you have snuck into my house and insulted my assistant? Vere opened his mouth. I cut in. He's got a point about the insult, but I'm willing to hear a number. Vere looked at me with something that might have been apology if he weren't too stiff for that. Mr. Wolfe, I will deposit $50,000 today to retain you. If you accept, if you resolve this matter without public scandal, I will add another 50. If you determine that a crime has been committed or is intended, I will cooperate with legal authorities to the full extent, even if it damages us. Wolfe's face did not change, because money only changes his face when it comes in the form of potatoes. Still, I saw the internal gears clicking. The sum wasn't tremendous to him, but it wasn't peanuts, and the situation smelled like chess. Wolfe loves chess more than he loves money, and almost as much as he loves not leaving the house. What form of mediation do they desire? Wolfe asked. They wish you to be present in a controlled environment while the games are conducted. You may observe, you may question, you may verify compliance. They want the games conducted at your brownstone. That last line hit like a ping-pong ball off a chandelier. Wolfe's brows rose. Not the full eighth this time, maybe a 16th. The brownstone was sacred ground. People didn't request it. They were invited, or they were dead. And if you refuse, Wolfe said. They say they will interpret refusal as confirmation that you are under someone's influence. They will publish at once. You have a letter from them? Wolfe asked. Yes, I brought copies. Vere reached into his coat and produced a slim folder. Wolfe did not take it. He stared at it like it was a live mouse. Put it on Mr. Goodwin's desk. He will read it to me if I wish. Vere obeyed. So far he had been disciplined. Now he was obedient. Crisis does that to well-raised men. I took the folder, but I didn't open it yet. I was thinking about the tale, about not seeing it, and about someone wanting to play head games in Wolfe's house. I had a feeling my shadow had a longer reach than Vere knew. Wolfe said, Mr. Ware, you are asking me to permit strangers to conduct an extortionate spectacle in my home, to serve your institution's stability and your pride. Your retention money is irrelevant to this decision. What makes you think I will agree? Vere hesitated, and I saw the first crack in his armor. Because I believe, he said, that the proposer is counting on you refusing. That is part of the strategy. They have chosen you not only for your mind, but for your inclination to protect your domain. If you refuse, it strengthens their narrative. If you accept, you control the field. There it was. That was what got Wolfe to blink. Control of the field. Wolfe's personal religion. Wolfe leaned back, hands on the chair arms like two fat judges. You have thought of this. That is not common in clients, yet your approach was ill-mannered. It suggests desperation. I am desperate, Vere said quietly. The Institute is my family's legacy, but I am also frightened. Not of scandal, of what the games may reveal. I've watched intelligent people turn into animals when their motives are exposed. The proposer understands that. They want to make a zoo. Wolfe's eyes went on him, steady and cold in the way a bath is cold before you test it. Then perhaps you should not play at all. If I don't, they crack us open. If I do, they may crack us from within. Either way, someone is playing us. I need a player who is not already on the board. Wolfe made a little sound of assent, not to the client, but to himself. His mind had already sat down at the chessboard and started moving pieces. I will consider it, he said. My consideration is not a promise. I will have Mr. Goodwin examine your documents. He will also ascertain who has been following him. I dislike hidden persons in my vicinity. It is a matter of hygiene. Ware's head dipped. Thank you. Wolfe raised a finger. Moreover, you will provide me a list of persons who are to participate in these games, and any others who might be implicated. If your blackmailer is inside your circle, we will need to know the circle's circumference. I will supply it immediately. And lastly, Wolfe said, voice still calm, if you or your blackmailer require me to leave this house, I will decline. I will not attend your institute. Any conference, any game, any meeting must be held here, under my rules, at my hours. Ware didn't flinch this time. He expected it. Agreed. That is what they demanded, in fact. They prefer your house. They called it neutral terrain. Nothing in this world is neutral, Wolfe said, especially my house. Ware rose, as if on cue. When should I return with the list? Today, at 4. Mr. Goodwin will receive you. Fritz will offer you beer. You will decline unless you are wise. Ware looked at me, perhaps to confirm whether that last line was a joke. I kept my face neutral. Let him sweat a little. He went to the door. Before he left, he turned. One more thing. The man I hired to follow Mr. Goodwin, his name is Cal Roper. He is not a thug. He is a former intelligence analyst. If you demand it, I will call him off. You will call him off, Wolfe said. Immediately. If I need my assistant watched, I will watch him myself. Ware nodded and left. The front door closed. For a moment the brownstone felt like itself again. That never lasts. I went back to the office with the folder in my hand and a new line of irritation in my forehead. Wolfe followed at his own pace, which in this case was slow enough to count as meditation. When he settled into his chair again, he said, Archie, I understand that your impression of your own competence is high, but it is not infinite. How have you failed to notice a tail? Maybe because he's good, I said. Maybe because I had other things on my mind, like keeping the wolf fed and the police at bay. I'll find him. You will. Quietly. We are now involved in a matter of strategy and blackmail. Those matters proceed by degrees. We will proceed by integers. I snorted. Wolfe, if you start talking like a math textbook, I'm calling Saul for a translation. At the moment, I don't want Saul. I want sense. Wolfe tapped a fat finger on the folder. Read. I opened it. The first page was another bone-colored letter, unsigned, typed. The blackmailer had a taste for theatrical stationery. Good taste, too, which made it worse. I skimmed, then read aloud, while Wolfe listened with his eyes shut, as he does when he wants a text to filter straight into his head without detouring through my face. The letter laid out the rules in civilized terms. 3 games, 3 days. Each game featured 2 participants and a stake from their personal or professional lives, something neither could afford to lose. The proposer promised to predict each participant's choice before they made it, sealed in an envelope. The arbiters, meaning Wolfe, would verify prediction and outcome. The institute was to pay and grant the anonymous board position if the proposer was correct at least 5 times out of 6 decisions. If less, the proposer would retreat. Failure or refusal triggered immediate publication of the archive, a collection of internal letters, emails, and recordings apparently culled from years of institute life. At the end, in a line that made my stomach go flat, the proposer added, "The games will be held at West 35th Street, under the eyes of the immovable man. There will be no violence unless the young man brings it." "Meaning me," I said. "They worry I'm the one who'll flip the table." Wolfe opened his eyes. "They know you well enough to fear you. That is disturbing. And flattering." "No, only disturbing." He sat in silence a second, then said, They have chosen their stage carefully. They are not amateurs, and their attention to you suggests that you, or someone close to you, is already a piece. Thanks, I said. Nothing like being told you're a pawn before lunch. Wolfe ignored me. We will accept the retention. We will not yet accept the games. That decision comes after we know the characters and the stakes. People are the only true variables. Right, I said. So I take a list at 4, locate my invisible buddy Cal Roper, and try not to punch anybody in the meantime. Anything else? Yes, Wolfe said. Do not be followed on the way to the barber shop. I'm not going to the barber shop. Then do not be followed to whatever frivolous place you do go. I grinned. You got it. I'll stay home and be shadowless. He gave me a look that said if I thought this was funny, I hadn't understood the geometry of the problem. Maybe I hadn't. But I knew one thing already. Somebody out there had decided that the best way to reach Nero Wolfe was through me, and had planned 3 fancy little games to do it. If that someone thought I was going to sit still and watch, they didn't know Archie Goodwin. And if they thought they were going to disturb the brownstone without paying a price, they didn't know Nero Wolfe at all. I didn't stay home and be shadowless, because I'm a grown man, and also because that's not how life works when somebody has been paid to trail your footsteps like confetti. But I did the next best thing. I went upstairs. Wolfe had already retreated to the dining room to sit and brood over coffee in a way that makes the coffee feel judged. Fritz was clattering softly in the kitchen, and the house had that calm before the fiddle feeling. I took the bone folder to my desk, lit a cigarette, and read the blackmailer's letter again, slower this time, listening to the words not for what they said, but for the kind of mind that chose them. Fancy stationery, formal diction, a taste for metaphor without overdoing it. Immovable man. Young man brings it. Somebody who knows. Wolfe's legend and my habit of turning legends into practical problems. Somebody near enough to the Ver Institute to have its internal archive, and near enough to me to care whether I carry a gun into their parlor game. I heard footfalls in the hall and turned, expecting Wolfe to want a recap. Instead, it was Fritz, bringing a tray like a diplomat, offering unspoken advice. "Beer, Archie?" he asked. "Not until at least one of us knows what's going on," I said. "Any chance you remember letting in Conrad Ver?" Of course. He said he had an appointment. He was very polite. He looked tense. Did he look like a man who would hire a tale? Fritz considered. He looked like a man who has too many thoughts. I do not know about tales. But he was careful. "Careful is our new house pet," I said. "Thanks, Fritz." He left and I leaned back, chair creaking. Something in the letter nagged at me. Not the games, not the threats. The venue. They had demanded Wolfe's house. That's either a flex or a necessity. If it was a flex, they were daring Wolfe to protect his turf. If it was a necessity, then the method depends on the turf. That's when I remembered something else. Ver had followed me 8 days. 8 days tacked on to 3 weeks since the proposal. Somebody had started watching me after Ver got the blackmail. Why then? Unless the blackmailer prompted Ver to watch me. Unless they knew me well enough to predict Ver would turn to Wolfe through me. In other words, the blackmailer is not only in Ver's circle. They're in ours, at least close enough to know the plumbing. I snapped my cigarette out, grabbed my coat and headed for the door. I was going to find Cal Roper, the invisible analyst. If he was good enough to tail me without my noticing, then I had to meet him before he got called off. Not to trade recipes, but to learn who hired him, how, what he saw, and whether he had any opinions about the kind of shadow he was being. I didn't announce the plan to Wolfe because I didn't need a sermon about frivolous places. I did poke my head into the dining room. "I'm stepping out," I said. Wolfe didn't look up from his coffee. "So I detect. I'll be back before 4. If anything comes in, tell it to wait." "Nothing waits unless it wishes." He took a sip. "Do not be followed. I'll try to disappoint somebody." Outside, the city was doing its winter imitation of itself. Grey edges and hurried faces. I walked down the stoop slowly, letting my eyes do what they're trained to do. Take a picture without asking. The street looked ordinary. 2 kids with knapsacks, a woman in a red coat juggling her umbrella, a man in a cap walking a dog that looked like a dispute between a mop and a rat. The usual. I turned right and went half a block, then paused at a newsstand to look at magazines I had no intention of buying. The trick in spotting a tale isn't to stare behind you like a man looking for his own ghost. It's to make your movements interesting enough that a follower has to adjust. I waited, watching reflections in the glass of a parked car. Anybody behind me? A couple. A delivery guy. No obvious shadow. So either Roper had been called off already, or he was as good as Ver said, meaning he had learned my rhythms and was playing them like a piano. I started walking again, crossed the street on a whim, then doubled back to the opposite corner, pretending to argue with a street map posted on a pole. I could feel the irritation crawling into my shoulders. I don't like being outplayed in my own sport. A voice behind me said calmly, "You're doing loops." I didn't jump. That would have been a compliment. I just turned. He was standing close enough to be in my peripheral vision all along, which either meant I'd missed him or he'd chosen his moment perfectly. Both were bad. Cal Roper was not what I expected. I'd pictured a lean ex-spook with a trench coat and a face like an eraser. This guy was 50-ish, maybe older, medium build, no drama in the clothes. Brown jacket, plain tie, slacks that knew the meaning of neutral. His hair was sandy and thinning, his eyes grey and alert, and his whole posture said he felt no need to prove he belonged where he was standing. "You're Cal Roper," I said. He nodded. "And you're Archie Goodwin. Mr. Ware told me to call it off. I already did, but I figured you'd want to know why you were being watched." "That makes one of us," I said. "Walk with me." We fell into step. He matched my pace without thinking about it, which is a small thing that tells you a man has spent years learning to fit into other people's footsteps. "You're good," I said. "Thanks. You ever make mistakes?" "Not on purpose." "Then why'd you let me spot you?" He looked at me sideways like I'd asked why he breathed. "You weren't spotting me. You were about to make a scene. Better to talk before you get loud." I grinned. "Fair. So tell me, in 8 days, what did you see?" "Normal movement. Brownstone to police headquarters once, Brownstone to a restaurant twice, 1 trip to an office on Madison. No meetings that looked covert, no packages handed off, no unusual signals. Lots of cigarettes." "Wolfe will be thrilled. Who hired you?" "Where? Directly. In person." "And why 8 days?" He hesitated a beat. "Because the person forcing those games warned him that someone might try to use you to influence Wolfe. Ware worried that was true. He decided to trust evidence." "What person?" "No name, no contact. Ware got his instructions through a courier drop and 1 encrypted email. He showed me. It was written by someone who knows his world. That world meaning strategy and mind games. Meaning people who think they can predict choices because they know what hurts." We had reached the corner, and I stopped. "Roper, did you notice anybody watching me besides you?" His eyes didn't flicker. "Yes." That was like somebody tapping a nail into the back of my skull. "Describe." "Not close, not steady." A man in a dark blue parka, early 30s, moved like he'd done this, but not well. I saw him twice. He wasn't with me. "Did you lose him?" "I didn't chase him. My job was you, not the crowd." "Okay." I swallowed the sting. "If you see him again, call me." He nodded. "Ware says you're on the case now." "Looks like it." "And if you're asking my opinion," he said, "then let it hang there until I wanted it." "I am. The games aren't the point, the pressure is. Whoever set them up wants Wolfe to play on their terms, even if the board is his house. That's not academic. That's personal. Welcome to my week, I said. I headed back to the brownstone with just under 2 hours to 4 o'clock and a brand new problem in my pocket, a second shadow. If Roper had seen him and I hadn't, then the guy in the parka wasn't there to follow me for where? He was there to follow Roper, or to follow both of us. Either way, Thursday was coming fast, and somebody had already started moving pieces before Wolfe had even decided to sit down at the board. When I got back to the brownstone, the place had the same polite quiet it always wears when it's about to be rude. Fritz was humming downstairs, which meant lunch had gone well and Wolfe hadn't discovered any sins in the sauce. I hung up my coat, checked my hat angle in the hall mirror out of habit, and went to the office. Wolfe was already there, which said more about his mood than any words would. He was in the red chair with his eyes at a half-mast and a book unopened on his lap, like a priest who has been interrupted mid-prayer and is deciding whether to forgive. He didn't ask where I'd been, because he wasn't interested in geography. He was interested in results. "Well," he said. I sat, lit a cigarette, and gave him the short version because the long version was just scenery. Cal Roper's reel. Good tale. Ware hired him direct. He saw nothing suspicious from me, sorry to disappoint. But he did see another tale, not his. A man in a dark blue parka. Twice. Average pro at best. Wolfe's eyelids lifted a fraction. "You did not see him?" "No, that's the part I'm chewing on." "Chew faster. If Roper observed him twice and you not at all, the man is not following you for Ware's reassurance. He is following the circumstances around you. Meaning either he wants to know who's tailing me, or he wants Ware to believe I'm being tailed. Or he's just a tourist who likes my tie." Wolfe ignored the tie angle. "Did Roper describe his face?" "Only general. Early 30s. Moves like he's done it, but not well, that's all." Wolfe grunted. "We will see if the parka appears again. Now we await Mr. Ware at 4. You say that, like 4, is a moral virtue. It is a fact, and facts are virtuous." I opened the folder of blackmailer rules again, mostly to look busy. But my ears were on the house. When a man says outsiders in the brownstone, you start hearing floorboards as if they're witnesses. At 4:02, the doorbell rang. Fritz went to answer it with his small-bore dignity. A moment later, Ware came down the hall, a little too brisk for a man trying to look calm. He wore a different suit, darker, and carried a slim briefcase like it contained his spine. I met him in the office doorway. "Mr. Ware." Right on time, which Wolfe believes is a sign of good character and weak imagination. His smile was tired. "I brought the list." "Come in. Put it on the desk." "Sit. Don't touch anything that blooms." He obeyed. Wolfe gave him a nod that passed for greeting. Ware set down a stapled packet, then a second, smaller envelope. The list of participants and relevant persons. And this was delivered to my office half an hour ago. For you. It was left with my receptionist. No name. Wolfe's chin lowered, which is what he does when he wants something without reaching. I took the envelope, checked it for obvious venom, and opened it with my thumb. Inside was a single card, again cream, again typed, again without signature. I read it once, then aloud. "The arbiter has been approached. The first game will proceed at the appointed hour. Any deviation will be considered admission of fear. We prefer the brownstone intact. Keep your young man leashed." I looked up. "They're not subtle," Ware said quietly. "They are confident." "Or desperate," I said. "Either way, they've got opinions about my leash." Wolfe spoke to Ware as if I wasn't there. "You are acceding to their demand to enter my house." "I am acceding to your decision, Mr. Wolfe. They insist the first game begin Thursday at 7 in the evening. Participants are aware only that there will be a private institute exercise supervised by you." "Participants, name them. Ware opened the packet. There are 6, but only 2 in each game. They were selected by the proposer in this order. He read. Game 1, Dr. Lydia Voss, Director of Research, and Martin Hale, a major donor and board vice chair. I felt my eyebrows go up. 2 big wheels, 1 brains, 1 money. Game 2, Professor Emil Varga, Senior Fellow, and Clarissa Reed, Head of Development. Game 3, myself and my cousin, Julian Ware, who sits on our board. Wolfe held up a finger, stopping him. You say selected by the proposer. Were these names given to you as fixed, or were you asked to choose among options? Fixed. In fact, Ware said, swallowing, that is one of the reasons I believe the proposer is within our circle. Their knowledge of personal dynamics is intimate. These pairings are not random. There are old tensions. Specify. Ware glanced at me, then decided I was now furniture and useful. Dr. Voss and Hale have been at odds for months. She wants our research to remain purely academic. He pushes for commercial partnerships. Their conflict has become personal. Voss believes Hale is corrupting our mission. Hale believes Voss is arrogant and ungrateful. Good, I said. So they each think the other is poison. That'll make for a cozy parlor game. Ware continued. Varga and Reed, their conflict is quieter. Reed is ambitious, very skilled at donor relations. Varga resents the influence of development on research direction. They have a history. He was once her mentor. Also good, I said. Mentors make the best enemies when they feel replaced. And Julian, Ware said, voice tightening. And I have a family dispute involving control of the Institute. He believes I've marginalized him. I believe he wants the Institute for his own projects. Wolfe absorbed this without visible reaction. Then he said, What are the stakes in each game? Ware spread his hands. We do not know precisely. The proposer said each game will involve a stake each participant values. They will reveal it at the start, but I have inferred possibilities. For Voss, it may involve her funding line or a pending publication. For Hale, it will be board influence or donor standing. For Varga, perhaps his tenure or a signature program. For Reed, her promotion. For Julian and me, likely the succession plan. But you don't know, Wolfe said. No, and I'm afraid to guess. Wolfe leaned back. Fear is sensible, yet you must attempt to be useful. Who else is in your circle? Assistants, security, anyone who handles records. Ware named 4 more, a general counsel, a chief operations officer, a longtime archivist named Nora Bly, and a young data scientist, Theo Park, who had recently built the Institute's encrypted research repository. Theo Park, data repository, archive of internal correspondence. My mind walked from the list to the threat in about 3 seconds and didn't like where it landed. Wolfe said, I will want each of these persons' background, habits, and particular enmities. Mr. Goodwin will obtain them. Ware nodded. I will make their schedules available, and I will instruct them to cooperate. You will instruct them to be candid, Wolfe corrected. Cooperation without candor is a mime. Ware looked puzzled, but agreed anyway. I scribbled the names in my notebook, even though I didn't need to. Sometimes the act of writing a name makes it feel more mortal. Wolfe was quiet a moment, then said, Now, Mr. Ware, listen carefully. I have not consented to the games, yet they have announced their intention to proceed. Therefore, we will permit Game 1 to begin here Thursday, under conditions I dictate. If I detect a motive beyond your stated predicament, I will stop the performance and expose the author. Do you accept this? Ware let out a breath he'd been hoarding. Yes, thank you. Do not thank me. It is not benevolence. It is necessity. Wolfe's eyes moved to me. Archie, you will go to the Ware Institute tomorrow morning. You will speak to Dr. Voss, Mr. Hale, Professor Varga, Ms. Reed, Julian Ware and any other pertinent person. You will observe what they do not say. You will also attempt to locate the Parker. Sure, I said. I'll bring binoculars and a sympathy card. Wolfe ignored that too. We are at the threshold. If these games are to be played, they are to be played with us holding the rules. That is the only tolerable strategy. I looked at Ware, at the stiffness behind his thank you, at the card the blackmailer had sent like a thumbprint on our door. The brownstone was about to host a set of psychological bear traps, and the guy who set them thought he could tell Wolfe where to sit and me where to stand. Thursday at 7. 2 days. Somebody believed they could predict human choices. I didn't know about that, but I knew one thing for sure. They hadn't predicted mine yet. Wednesday morning, I took the subway uptown with a notebook in my pocket and Wolfe's instructions in my ear like ballast. The Ware Institute sat in one of those midtown buildings that looked like money learned to stand up straight. Glass, pale stone, a lobby big enough to echo your bank balance. If you dropped a nickel in there, it would land as a dime. I gave my name to a receptionist who had the kind of smile that comes with a non-disclosure agreement, and 10 minutes later, Conrad Ware met me at the elevator. He looked like he hadn't slept, which is always a good sign in a client. It means they're not pretending. "Good morning, Mr. Goodwin," he said. "Archie," I told him. "Mr. Goodwin only comes out for funerals and invoices. How's morale in the zoo?" He winced, and I liked him a little more for it. "We've told them only that Mr. Wolfe is consulting on a private strategic exercise. They know Thursday's important. They don't know why." "Good. Secrets make people honest in the wrong ways." I glanced around. "You want me to start with Voss?" He nodded and led me down a corridor lined with framed photos of people looking Nobel Prize thoughtful. We passed offices with frosted glass and names etched in tasteful fonts. The whole place smelled faintly of coffee and ambition. Dr. Lydia Voss's office was at the end, larger than my apartment and half as warm. She rose when I entered, and the movement was precise, like she was ticking a training box. Early 40s, sharp cheekbones, hair pulled back without mercy, eyes that didn't waste time on anyone's self-esteem. She wore a navy dress and a silver watch that looked like it had been chosen by a committee. The room was full of books, and none of them looked decorative. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, holding out a hand. "Conrad told me you were coming." Shook. Her grip was firm without being friendly. "He did. Said you were one of the bright bulbs he's trying to keep from being unscrewed." Her mouth did something I think was meant to be a smile. That would be consistent with his current anxieties. "Please sit." I sat, and she didn't. She stayed standing behind her desk, which was a way of announcing she intended to control the altitude of the conversation. "Let me be direct," she said. "I don't know why Nero Wolfe is involved. I don't know why I'm being asked to participate in a game. But I know the Institute has a problem with infiltration. If you're here to help Conrad smooth over donor interference, you'll find me uncooperative." "Well," I said, "you're batting 1,000 already, but I'm not smoothing anything. I'm collecting impressions and facts. Start with your impression of Martin Hale." A flicker crossed her face. Annoyance, then something colder. "Martin is not a scientist. He likes to say he supports science. What he supports is influence. He wants products, partnerships, press. He wants his name in our papers like a watermark. And you don't. I do not. If the Institute becomes a venture fund with a research wing, it loses its purpose. And frankly, its credibility. Is that a philosophical complaint or a personal one?" Her eyes sharpened. "If you're asking whether I hate him, the answer is no. Hate is inefficient, but I do believe he is dangerous to the Institute." "Dangerous enough to blackmail it?" She stared at me as if deciding whether the question was fair. "No, he's too visible. He wouldn't risk a scandal that could trace back to him. He prefers pressure in daylight." "Anyone else you'd call dangerous?" "Julian Ware is ambitious and irresponsible. Clarissa Reed is brilliant at raising money and too willing to promise donors the moon. Emil Varga is stubborn but honorable. Theo Park is gifted and naive. Nora Bly knows every secret in this building and pretends she doesn't. That's a good list, I said. How about you? Any secrets worth typing on cream stationery? Her chin lifted. Everyone has secrets. Mine don't endanger the Institute. That's not what your blackmailer thinks. Her nostrils flared slightly. Blackmailer? I watched it carefully. Surprise. Real and instant. Not acted. That didn't clear her, but it made her less likely to be the author. The author wouldn't be surprised to hear the word. They'd be bored. I can't say more, I told her, but you're expected Thursday at 7 in Wolfe's office. You'll be told the stake then. One more thing. Has anyone been poking around research files lately, or asking odd questions? She hesitated. Theo has been under pressure. Hale wants a preview of a decision modeling project. Conrad said no. Theo told me Hale went around him, asked an outside consultant to evaluate our datasets. I stopped it. Outside consultant. He called himself Darren Sloan. I believe he met with Clarissa Reed at one point. I never saw credentials. That one went in my notebook with a fat circle. Unknown consultant sniffing around decision models and data. Cream stationery guy loved decision predictions. Draw a line, get a headache. I thanked her, stood, and she finally sat, which was her way of ending it. Ware met me in the corridor like a nervous usher. How did it go? She's a razor wrapped in principle, I said. If she's part of your circle, she's also part of your backbone. Don't let Hale buy her out. He didn't smile. Hale is waiting. Great, let's go admire daylight pressure. Martin Hale's office was on the other side of the floor, wider, brighter, and smelling faintly of cologne. Hale himself rose like a man used to rising for applause. Late 50s, handsome in a weathered way, hair silver and tailored, suit that cost more than my first car and fit like it had a lease. Archie Goodwin, he said, as if my name was a brand he'd heard of and might invest in. I'm a great admirer of Wolfe's work. Wolfe notices admiration the way a rhinoceros notices perfume, I said. Sit. We sat. He leaned back easily, hands steepled. Conrad says you're doing preliminary interviews. I assume this is about the strategic exercise Thursday. That's the umbrella, sure. I looked at him. You and Dr. Voss have been disagreeing over mission. How would you describe that disagreement? He smiled. Practiced. Lydia is brilliant. She's also rigid. The world has changed. Research doesn't live in a monastery anymore. If we don't engage with the market will engage with us, and not politely. Meaning you want commercialization. Meaning I want relevance and funding. We can't publish papers on purity while donors go to institutes that create real-world tools. Do you think Conrad's handling it well? His smile thinned. Conrad is cautious. Caution can be noble, but it can also be paralysis. Sounds like daylight pressure, I said. He ignored the tease. If Wolfe is involved, perhaps Conrad wants a decisive mind to cut through the noise. I welcome it. You welcome a game you don't understand. I welcome any process that reveals who is acting in good faith. He paused. And who is not. I let that hang a second too. Anybody you think isn't? His eyes didn't dart. They settled. Julian Vare wants control. Clarissa wants advancement. Emile wants to keep us in the 17th century. Lydia wants to be pope of a church with no parishioners. None of those things are crimes. But they make a man wonder what other levers people are willing to pull. Like blackmail levers? I watched his face the way you watch a watch. There was a micro stall, maybe half a heartbeat. Surprise? Not really. More like interest. Like I'd named a tool he'd considered. Blackmail is vulgar, he said. Also effective. Only on the timid. And are you timid, Mr. Hale? He met my eyes. No. That was true, or he was a better actor than I'd give him credit for. Either way, I didn't smell fear on him. I smelled appetite. When I left his office, I had two impressions and one solid lead. Voss was principled and startled. Hale was smooth and not startled enough. And Darren Sloane, if that was his real name, had been rummaging around decision modeling data like a raccoon in a silver pantry. If the blackmailer wanted to predict choices, he'd need the right data. If he wanted to crack the institute, he'd need the right people. And if he wanted to do it in Wolfe's house, he'd need to be sure Wolfe couldn't see the trap before he stepped over it. So far, I hadn't seen the trap, but I'd found the footprint. Thursday at 7 on the dot, the brownstone had company, the way a cathedral has incense. Too much for comfort, but deliberate. Fritz had arranged the front room for a visiting delegation with his usual sinister hospitality. Chairs aligned, lamps at polite angles, beer offered like a passcode. I hung around the doorway to Wolfe's office in my best backstage stance, watching people arrive as if they were actors who didn't know their scripts had been rewritten. Dr. Lydia Voss came first, punctual enough to be a philosopher. She wore the same navy severity and carried no coat, though the air had teeth. She nodded at me, glanced once at the house with a flicker of curiosity, then sat in the front room with the rigid patience of a woman waiting for a lab result. Martin Hale arrived 2 minutes later, breezing in with a smile preloaded. He admired the brownstone the way a man admires property he hasn't bought yet. When Fritz offered beer, Hale accepted. That told me two things. He liked to own a room by behaving as if he already did, and he expected the night to be long. Clarissa Reed came with Hale's timing but not his ease. She was mid-30s, sleek, attractive in that polished midtown way that suggests you have never owned a pair of flat shoes. She wore a black coat, a white scarf, and the kind of smile that stays in place even when your stomach has moved out. She shook my hand warmly and asked how Wolfe was, as if he were a donor she wanted to keep sweet. I watched her eyes while she spoke. They traveled the hall, took in the stairs, and then returned to me like a homing pigeon. She was cataloguing the house, not admiring it, measuring it. Professor Emil Varga and Clarissa exchanged a stiff hello that had old disappointment in it. Varga looked like a man who had stopped expecting gratitude and settled for quiet respect. He kept his coat on, not because he was cold, but because he didn't plan to stay longer than necessary. Julian Vere arrived last, which in a family dispute means making an entrance. He was Conrad's age, smoother around the edges, with a relaxed walk that said he was comfortable with other people being uncomfortable. He greeted Conrad, who had come with me and was now pacing a little behind Voss, with a cordiality that wasn't fooled by itself. At 7:15, Wolfe came down. He did not hurry. He allowed the air to adjust to him, the way a tide allows sand to remember what it is. He wore his brown suit, which is his armor for battle indoors, and his face had that settled, remote interest he gets when he knows the solution is already in his hand, and he's waiting for the right moment to open his fingers. "Please," he said from the threshold of the front room, "come to my office." It wasn't a request. We filed in. Wolfe's office has held murderers, con men, senators, and a nun once, and it never looks impressed. Tonight, it held 5 people who thought they were attending a strategic exercise, and one who knew very well they were attending a trap. Wolfe took his chair behind the desk. I sat at mine with a notebook and a cigarette I had no intention of smoking until I needed a prop. The suspects, if you could call them that yet, arranged themselves where the furniture suggested. Wolfe watched the arrangement like a man noting a chess opening. "Mr. Ware," Wolfe said, "you will explain to your colleagues why they are here." Conrad cleared his throat. "We've been asked to participate in a confidential decision exercise supervised by Mr. Wolfe. The purpose is to test a predictive method that has been proposed to the Institute. The proposer believes they can predict our choices in certain strategic scenarios." I saw faces change. Voss's brows rose in skepticism. Hale looked entertained. Varga frowned. Julian's mouth twitched with curiosity. Clarissa held still, but I saw something tighten under the scarf. Maybe her throat. Wolfe said, "The proposer is not present, or at least not visible. They have sent instructions for the first game. Mr. Goodwin will read them." I unfolded a cream card that had been delivered to the house an hour earlier by a courier who refused to give a name. I read it aloud. Game 1. Participants, Dr. Lydia Voss and Mr. Martin Hale. Stake, the Kestrel grant. Dr. Voss is to decide whether to allow the grant's data to be used for a private commercial partnership. Mr. Hale is to decide whether to publicly support Dr. Voss's directorship of the research program next month. Each decision is sealed, simultaneous. Prediction enclosed. I put the card down. The Kestrel grant was a 7-figure research line Voss had fought to keep academic. Hale wanted it commercial. The blackmailer had picked their sore tooth. Voss's face went white for a blink, then reorganized into anger. Hale smiled without surprise. Wolfe lifted a hand. "You will each write your decision, yes or no, on the paper before you. Fold it. I will not see it until both are complete." Fritz had placed a small writing pad and pencil at each chair. They wrote. Voss with a tight, furious stroke. Hale with leisurely clarity, like he was signing a program. When they folded their slips, Wolfe nodded to me. I opened a second envelope that had come with the instructions. Inside was the proposer's prediction, already written. I read, "Voss? No. Hale? No." Wolfe said, "Please reveal your decisions." Voss opened hers first. "No," she said flatly. "Our data is not for sale." Hale opened his. "No," he said smoothly. "I will not support her directorship publicly." A small ripple went through the room. Even Clarissa blinked. The proposer was right on both, and the second one stung because Hale had just said it to Voss's face without even needing daylight. Voss looked at him as if he'd slapped her. Hale met her gaze evenly. "It's not personal, Lydia. You're too rigid for leadership." "It's personal the moment you use me as a bargaining chip," she shot back. Wolfe raised his voice no higher than a cardigan. "That is sufficient. The proposer's prediction is correct. We proceed to Game 2. He did not let emotions swell. He didn't have to. The room was already pressurized. I read the next card. Game 2. Participants, Professor Emil Varga and Ms. Clarissa Reed. Stake, the donor dossier. Professor Varga is to decide whether to sign a letter opposing the Institute's new commercialization initiative, to be circulated to the board tomorrow. Ms. Reed is to decide whether to recommend Professor Varga for emeritus status next quarter. Same procedure. Prediction enclosed. Varga stiffened. Clarissa's smile came on like a light, but it didn't warm. Wolfe said, "Right." They did. Varga wrote slowly, thoughtfully, as if each letter were a moral choice. Clarissa wrote quickly, not looking at the paper. She might as well have been writing a grocery list. I opened the prediction envelope and read, "Varga, yes. Reed, yes." Varga revealed his. "Yes," he said softly. "We are not a corporation." Clarissa revealed hers. "Yes," she said in the same soft tone. "I will recommend emeritus status." Varga looked at her like he'd been punched in the same old bruise. "Clarissa." She tilted her head. "Emil, you taught me to be honest about institutional needs." "I taught you to be honest about truth," he said. "And truth changes," she replied. "So do people." Wolfe let them sit with it for 2 beats. Then he said, "Again, the proposer is correct. We are at 4 accurate predictions out of 4 choices. Their claimed method appears plausible. Now we come to Game 3. The temperature in the room dropped a degree. Even Hale stopped smiling. I read the final card. Game 3. Participants, Mr. Conrad Vere and Mr. Julian Vere. Stake, the founder's letters. Mr. Conrad Vere is to decide whether to release the sealed founding correspondence to the board tonight. Mr. Julian Vere is to decide whether to resign his board seat immediately if the correspondence remains sealed. Prediction enclosed. Conrad went stiff as oak. Julian's smile vanished. Voss muttered, "Founder's letters." Hale's face did something small and ugly. Clarissa's eyes widened a sliver before she recovered. Varga looked from one Vere to the other, startled at the family blood now on the table. Conrad swallowed. "This is outrageous. Those letters were never part of any exercise." Wolfe said quietly, "They are now. You will write your decisions." Both men wrote. Conrad's hand shook once, then steadied. Julian wrote with the easy posture of a man who thinks the world is obliged to allow him options. I opened the prediction envelope. This time there were 3 lines. Conrad. Yes. Julian. No. Mr. Wolfe, stop. I let out a breath before I could censor it. Every head turned to me. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Read it again. I did. He sat very still. Then he said, "Do not reveal your decisions yet." That was new, and the room felt it. Wolfe placed his fingertips together. "We have arrived at the purpose of this evening, not to test prediction, to demonstrate control." He looked at Conrad. "Mr. Ware, you told me about the founder's correspondence this afternoon. You told me only after Mr. Goodwin extracted it from you. That secrecy was foolish, but it served one function. It limited who knew about those letters to us, to your counsel, to Nora Bly, and to those who had already been prying for them." Conrad blinked. "Yes." Wolfe turned his head fractionally toward Clarissa Reed. "Miss Reed, yesterday you asked Mr. Ware, casually, whether those letters were still kept in physical form. You have twice introduced a man you called Darren Sloan as an auditor or consultant. You have pressed the archivist for backups. You have provided a direct line to the data scientist. You have also been the only person in this circle whose decisions tonight were not merely predictable, but essential to the proposer's narrative." Clarissa's smile twitched. "Mr. Wolfe, I don't understand what you're implying." "Of course you do," Wolfe said. "You understand everything you need to. That is why you are frightened now." "I'm not frightened." "Then you are a spectacular liar." Her cheeks flushed. Hale shifted, watching. Voss leaned forward, eyes hard. Varga looked wounded, but not surprised anymore. Wolfe went on, voice as calm as a library. The proposer's prediction of 2 choices in each game required knowledge of each participant's motives and current pressures. Most of that knowledge is widely distributed within your institute. But the stake of Game 3, the founder's letters, was not. It was newly introduced by the proposer today. Yet the proposer predicted Mr. Conrad Vere would say yes, and Mr. Julian Vere would say no. That prediction could only be issued by someone who knew the stake in advance. Clarissa opened her mouth. Wolfe lifted a finger. "You knew. You learned of the letters yesterday from Mr. Ware. You then arranged for the proposer to include them tonight. You are the proposer." The room snapped like a cable. Voss said sharply, "Clarissa." Varga looked as if the floor had slipped. "No." Hale stared at her with a slow, dawning calculation. Julian laughed once, short and disbelieving. "You? Blackmailing us?" Clarissa's eyes went to everyone, then back to Wolfe. Her voice was controlled, but there was anger leaking through the polish. "This is ridiculous. Because I asked a question about a historical file, you accuse me of extortion." "You did not merely ask," Wolfe said. "You attempted to obtain the archive and the predictive model training data through your associate. You failed twice because principled people blocked you. When that failed, you shifted to the psychology of humiliation. The games are designed to do what force could not, unfreeze locked cabinets by creating chaos, anger, distraction. While everyone watched their rival's choice, your associate could attempt access again." Clarissa's gaze flicked a hair toward the hall door. I saw it. Wolfe did too. "Mr. Goodwin," Wolfe said. I was already up. I moved to the door, opened it, and there was Saul Panzer stepping in like a man who has always belonged wherever he is. He had arrived 10 minutes earlier and had been waiting in the hall at Wolfe's request. "Saul," I said. "Anything?" He nodded. "Your friend in the dark blue parka was at the back door 5 minutes ago. I took him for a walk. He's in the kitchen with Fritz and a very polite revolver." Clarissa went pale. Hale half rose. Voss's face froze into vindication. Varga closed his eyes. Wolfe said to Clarissa, "Darren Sloan is not his name. He is your hired intrusion specialist, a former systems administrator dismissed from this institute in 2021 for abusing privileges. He still knew the legacy credential map, and under your direction he attempted a remote retrieval Tuesday night. Tonight he attempted a physical one." Clarissa's breath came fast and ugly now. "You can't prove I directed anything." "I can," Wolfe said. "Because you just looked toward the door when I spoke of disruption. A guilty person does that when their plan is collapsing." She made a small, bitter sound. "You're very sure of yourself for a man who hasn't left his chair." "I'm sure because you are not subtle enough to defeat logic. Your motives are transparent in the only way that matters." He ticked them off with a calm savagery. "You wanted power. You wanted to shift the Ver Institute toward commercialization and donor capture, because that is where the money is and your ambition lives." Mr. Hale was a natural ally, but he would never risk a public coup. So you manufactured a crisis that would force the board to accept an anonymous strategic savant onto its roster, a savant who would in fact be you, operating under a philanthropic shell. The predictive method was a lure. Your real weapon was the archive, the founder's letters and donor correspondence that could destroy Conrad Vere's moral authority and therefore remove his resistance to your agenda. Hale said slowly, "You were going to blackmail us into voting you in." Clarissa turned on him. "I was going to save this institute from your hypocrisy. You want commercialization, but you want it without blood on your hands. You'd let Conrad take the fall while you wink at donors. I was willing to do what you weren't." Voss's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "By threatening to ruin us." "By threatening to reveal what we are," Clarissa snapped. "You hide behind purity while living on dirty money. You all do." Conrad's face was gray. "Clarissa, I trusted you." "I did what I had to." Her eyes flashed. "You were going to let this place die politely. I refused." Wolfe regarded her with something like pity, which in him is a hard thing. "You refused because you are vain. If you had cared for the Institute, you would not have endangered it for your own ascension." She laughed once, bitter. "And yet you were willing to let the games proceed." "I was willing to let you expose yourself." He nodded to Saul. "Call Inspector Kramer. The man in the kitchen will confirm your association. Mr. Fair will provide the founder's letters to the police as evidence of the extortion attempt, under seal if your counsel is competent. Your archive will become the property of the law. Your anonymous board seat will be a cell." Clarissa's shoulders sagged. For the first time, the Polish cracked all the way through, and she looked like a tired, angry young woman who had mistaken ruthlessness for righteousness. Saul stepped out to make the call. The rest of the room sat in stunned silence. Even Hale looked unsure whether to be furious or grateful that Wolfe's logic had saved him from having to choose between his appetite and his reputation. Voss stared at Clarissa with a bleak sadness. Varga looked as if his heart had folded in on itself. Julian watched Conrad as if seeing him newly, not as a rival but as a cousin who had just been mugged by someone wearing a smile. Conrad finally spoke, hoarse. "We'll deal with the charter and the donors after this, but Clarissa, why the threats? Why the cruelty?" Clarissa looked at him steadily. "Because nice requests don't move men like Hale, and they don't move boards. Fear does." Wolfe said softly, "You are wrong. Fear moves people quickly. Respect moves them correctly." She flinched at that as if it were a personal insult, which of course it was. When Kramer arrived 20 minutes later, puffing indignation up Wolfe's stoop, the thing was already dead on the floor and all he had to do was tag it. Saul brought in the Parker man, thin, nervous, eyes like a rat's, who folded the moment he saw Clarissa. He named her, named the money she promised, named the plan to grab the digital backups during the distraction of the games. Kramer listened, scowled, and then looked at me as if I had personally scheduled his hypertension. Clarissa was taken out without histrionics. She didn't fight. She didn't weep. She walked as if she had decided that consequences were another kind of game and she intended to play them straight. After they were gone, the brownstone slowly inhaled again. Voss and Varga left together, not speaking, scholars whose faith had been bruised. Julian lingered long enough to murmur something to Conrad about family and lawsuits, then left too. Hale stayed at the door a moment, looking at the house like it was a territory Wolfe had defended on his behalf. He said, "I don't know whether to thank you or be ashamed." "Try both," I said. He nodded once and went. Conrad remained, sitting for the first time all evening like a man who no longer knew where to put his hands. "I'm sorry," he said to Wolfe, "for bringing this into your home." Wolfe waved a huge hand. "You did not bring it. You were used as a vehicle. Beware of those who offer salvation wrapped in coercion. Their God is always themselves." Conrad swallowed, eyes wet but steady. "What happens now?" "Now you return to your institute," Wolfe said, "and you repair the damage by being candid about the founder's compromise before someone else makes a weapon of it. You do it on your terms, in daylight. Mr. Hale will assist, since his fingerprints are already on the letters." Conrad looked startled, then nodded slowly. "Yes, you're right." He stood, shook Wolfe's hand with real gratitude, then shook mine with something like brotherhood, and left. The quiet after that was the good kind. Fritz appeared with dinner as if he had been waiting all his life for the door to close. We ate. Wolfe ate better than I did, because when Wolfe eats, he does it as a philosophical proof of existence. Over coffee he said, "Ambition is not a sin, it is a fact. The sin is to imagine your ambition grants you moral exemption." I took a sip. "You're saying Clarissa wasn't a monster. Monsters are simple. She was not. She was merely wrong, and clever enough to be dangerous." "And the predictive method?" Wolfe snorted. "A parlor trick. She used intimate knowledge and pressure to produce predictable choices. Human beings are often predictable when their wounds are squeezed in the same place. Comforting." "It is," Wolfe said, "because predictability is not destiny. It is only data. The human folly is to think that knowing someone's weakness entitles you to exploit it." I leaned back, letting the brownstone settle into itself again. "You know," I said, "there's still a shadow that followed Goodwin. It just turned out to be wearing a scarf." Wolfe's mouth twitched. "Your metaphors are improving. Try not to require another to test them." "Sure," I said, "but if you do miss your orchids, just blame strategy." He looked at me over the rim of his cup, eyes dry and amused. "Archie, I never blame strategy. I blame people who use it badly." And that was as close to a punchline as he was going to get, which was fine by me. The case was closed, the house was whole, and the only shadow left in the room was the one cast by Wolfe's chair, exactly where it belonged.